Welcome back, everybody, to the Important Nonsense Podcast. 32 teams in 32 days, taking you around the league, getting you prepped for your 2023 fantasy football drafts. Neil Smith, Mike Manning, Mike Burland. How we doing, gentlemen? How's it going?
It's good. I mean,
Fantastic.
we're on a roll here of some good days and good teams here.
We are
Let's keep
we
it
are in
rolling.
the salad days of of this, because believe me, yeah, it's not always as rosy as yesterday's show and today's show that we're going to go through. Uh, Without further ado, we are here today to break down the Buffalo Bills. A good team. These are always interesting to cover. It's we all know that for the most part the names that you really want to be targeting. Even the casual football fan knows that. It's finding the diamonds in the rough on the good teams that is sometimes harder to do. Um, as always, this is going to be based on 12-team PPR redraft, God's format. The stats that you will be hearing come from Fantasy Pros. We are a Fantasy Pros affiliate and are happy to be there. Thank you, Fantasy Pros. And all the depth charts that we will be using and referencing come from Player Profiler. Shout out to Jack Kavanaugh. Jack, hope you're well. And for context, this show is being recorded on July 19th. So if anything we say sounds a little bit dated, that would be why. Tune in to the wrap up show where we will amend any takes that need amending and adjust any projections that need adjusting. And without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Josh Allen. We all know Josh Allen. He good. Josh Allen's good at football.
True.
Rare that I have been so surprised by someone coming out of college making the leap that this man has made. I will eat crow. I was not a Josh Allen fan when he came into the league, and was not convinced that he would ever actually learn how to throw the ball. We've always known he could throw the ball far. It's a question of learning to throw the ball accurately. And over the last couple of years, his transformation into a real accurate passer, I will admit, I was wrong. As it relates to Josh Allen for this season, though, because of that tasty rushing floor that we know he has, and those lovely red zone carries that they just cannot seem to get away from giving him. Josh Allen opens the season as the QB2, which would translate to 41 overall in your draft. However, because people always overdraft quarterback, his ADP is 16 overall, thereby guaranteeing that I will not roster Josh Allen in any format whatsoever. I will make this very simple. There is no reason to draft Josh Allen or any quarterback at 16 overall. You should let someone else make that mistake and focus on collecting running backs and wide receivers like Thanos collects rings, and then go ahead and let someone else overpay for quarterback, because historically there is no way that you could return on that investment. Peyton freaking Manning couldn't return on that investment. It's not really sustainable. I realize Josh Allen is talented. I realize that he is one of the Konami Code tier 1 quarterbacks that has the rushing floor that we're all so excited about. There is no chance that I am taking him with the 4th pick of the 2nd round in a 12-team league. I will never be able to recover from that decision and actually fill out a proper roster. And with that, I've said my piece. Mike Manning, have at it, my friend.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking about this being his down year in the past 3 years because he was quarterback 2 instead of quarterback 1. So
this is the drop off. It's the drop off.
I think either quarterback 2, quarterback, either way, he's a top 3 option in every single league, no matter what. So it's just that's what he is. He's the rusher of this offense. He is the red zone in this offense. He is the passer, obviously, in this offense. He's not afraid to do any of it. So this is a offense that also is more fast-paced, likes to score points. All good things for fantasy. And last year, he took a bit of a hit because of an elbow injury that was very confusing at the time, because it seemed to pop up out of nowhere, and people had to rush to the waiver wire to see about if Case Keenum was available just in case. Because it was up to game time that they were sitting there man, we're going to see how he does, see how he practices. And then game time was we're going to see how he works out a little bit, and we'll make the decision later. So it appears it had happened either in the Week 8 game against Green Bay or during the practice before the Jets game in Week 9. Before those weeks, before Week 8, his lowest point total was 24.5 points. He had 2 games over 33 in 5 games. So he was on fire. He was the quarterback one by a good margin, I believe. Then he gets the injury, either in Week 8, which he only scored 19.6 points, or in Week 9, where he definitely had a bad game against the Jets that week. But he scored 26.8. He still scored points, but he definitely played poorly. From then on, he had games that were 12.5, 16.9. Like, these weren't what he was getting to before. That elbow injury definitely hampered him the second half of the season, and ended up hampering all the other players as well on the offense. He appears to be healthy. He's back to being a top 3 option at worst for you drafting. I'm not drafting him in the second round, but anybody that wants to, I don't blame you.
I just can't handle that draft philosophy. I just can't handle it. My brain rejects it. It flies in the face of everything I believe in. Mike B. Rail split it. I'm all out. Mike's saying he's at least permits it. Where do you land on this debate?
Yeah, similar to what we talked about with Lamar Jackson, is you gotta know who you're drafting it with as well. And there's a lot of people who see the name Mahomes and Allen and Jalen Hurts and say, "Oh, I watched them in the Super Bowl," and they draft them in the second round or something. So you have to keep that in mind. I generally don't want to draft them that high, but if you're going to draft one of these guys, Josh Allen is in that tier. It's Mahomes, Hurts, and Allen. One of those 3 guys. Those should be the first 3 quarterbacks, in my opinion, being drafted. If you want to make an argument, like, is Josh Allen going to be running the ball less? I mean, there's some signs pointing to it. We'll talk about a couple free agent running backs they brought in here soon that maybe it's pointing to. We can see a slight drop off in some rushing, because that guy, Allen takes a bunch of hits. Just watching him play, like, that guy he gets beat up. And like Mike Manning said about the elbow injury, and not sure if that came on a rush or not, but all those hits kind of add up. So if you want to have him third in that tier because you think he's going to drop off, that's fine. But he's definitely he's up there, one of the top 3 quarterbacks. But generally, yeah, I'm not going to take him in the second round. I'm going to wait, a couple more rounds, 3-4 more rounds, and get a better value.
Okay. So there you go. Nobody disagrees that Josh Allen is supremely talented and is a huge fantasy asset. So we can quibble about whether or not he's worth the ADP, but in my mind, no. But people are going to do what people are going to do. You know what I mean? So with that, there really isn't that much more to say. Like, we've kind of seen this movie. He's good. He'll be drafted high. If you want in, you have to be prepared to pay. You have to be prepared to pay for that. Funnily enough, you mentioned Case Keenum. Case Keenum no longer the backup. Backup now, Kyle Allen. Got to have both Allens. Must have both Allens in Buffalo. At least the Bills do. Do not draft Kyle Allen. There's no reason to draft Kyle Allen. But it is worth noting that is the new backup there. What I think is more interesting than Josh Allen good at football, Josh Allen, et cetera, is the running back room. You mentioned it, Mike, about some free agent guys. So I'm just going to rattle these off real quick, and then we'll go through them one at a time. You have James Cook, who was drafted by the team. I believe this is his second year with the team. You have Latavius Murray, who's played all over the league, Saints and Ravens most notably. And then you have Jordan Mims, who I believe was also a late round draft pick to kind of round out the room there. If I'm honest, let's just do this way. I think Nyheim Hines makes the team, but mostly to play special teams. I see a lot of nodding.
Yeah,
okay.
I agree.
All right. So he'll make the team largely to play special teams. Latavius Murray, I think, is a cap casualty and a roster spot casualty. I don't think he's going to make the team. I don't see what the point would be of unless you're going to cut Jordan Mims, but you just drafted him. Are you guys sold on the idea they're going to carry 5 running backs?
I'm looking at 4.
I think it's 4, and I think in that way, Latavius Murray is the one who gets shown the door. He's the oldest. I mean, maybe they decide to cut bait on Mims and then try to re-sign him on practice squad. Maybe that's the way the news goes.
I would
Could
probably
be.
lean more that way.
It wouldn't shock me. Either way, wouldn't shock me. For that reason, for fantasy purposes, Nyheim Hines, Latavius Murray, Jordan Mims do not matter. They are ancillary pieces that have no actual fantasy value. So let's talk about what does matter. James Cook and Damian Harris. And it's kind of hard to talk about one without talking about the other, which is why I'm going about this in the manner that I'm going about it, as opposed to keeping them all, separate. Let's start with Cook. James Cook, early ranking, RB 32, translates to about 87 overall. ADP is 81 overall, so public largely in line with that. Damian Harris, because people I don't think know what to do with this, early ranking, RB 37, would translate to about 106 overall, current ADP 115. And I think that tells you what you need to know in a large way about the running back room here. The experts don't seem to have much confidence. The public seems to have even less because they're not even willing to draft them at where the quote-unquote expert consensus lands it. I can tell you for me, since we're discussing PPR, I'm more interested in James Cook for the following reasons. I believe James Cook to be the primary recipient of all the vacated passing work. I do not believe that they're going to sub in Nyheim Hines just to catch passes. I could be wrong. It's happened before. It's rare. It's happened before. But I believe in this case that James Cook is the one who will be the recipient of a lot of the vacated passing work from the Devin Singletary leaving. Towards the end of the year, he started to see an uptick in snaps. He started to see an uptick in targets, started to see an uptick in attempts. And the big thing also with Cook is he was PFF's number 1 graded running back in terms of breakaway speed. The man is like he's shot out of a cannon. So that's where I'm looking. That's where I'm looking here between the margins. Victory is always in the margins. And the thing that I'm looking for when it comes to a running back is it's a little pricey at the end of the 6th round. I'm not going to lie. But if I'm right, you could wind up with a guy who catches a lot of passes, which is always super valuable in PPR, that also has good breakaway speed. And that particular cocktail has proven to be very successful when you're evaluating PPR. So I don't necessarily – it makes it harder for me to get excited about Damian Harris because Damian Harris is not going to be there to catch passes. And I really don't see them taking Cook off the field to put Hines on to catch passes, except in maybe very scripted third down work. I think he's primarily going to play special teams and run punts is really what I think they want him for. So for me, I'm actually pretty interested in Cook because Harris, I'm convinced, is actually kind of just a battering ram that they've brought in to do the Zach Moss job that he failed at doing for so many years. And I think they want to use him to pound the ball between the tackles and to try to use him more in the red zone to try to preserve Josh Allen. Historically, they have failed at this, which scares me as it relates to Damian Harris. So the way I evaluate it is I'm a lot more bullish on if I got to spend a 6th round pick. Let's say I'm committing to the idea that I need to spend a 6th round pick on a Bills running back. Cook would be the one that I lean to in a PPR format. If we were playing standard, it would be Harris and it wouldn't be close. It's not a discussion at that point. But since this is geared to PPR, I would be more interested in Cook. I think the conversation then becomes, are either of those guys worth a 6th round pick? And that's where I'm going to throw it open. Mike, I see you looking at me. Mike Manning, see you looking at me like I have 2 heads. Wouldn't be the first time. What do you think about it, all of the things I just said? Take it to shreds, my friend. Go nuts. Be brutal.
Yeah, I think that the optimism is there, but I think it's a little bit of overvalued optimism because I don't think I would take a Bills running back in the 6th round. If I had Cook as my RB4, I'd feel a lot better about it, but RB3, I'm getting a little bit iffy there
Mm-hmm.
because if you're looking at their two roles are probably going to be very defined. Cook will get carries, but it's going to become more in the passing game, and he's going to be involved. Singletary had about 47 targets last year. Cook had about 33. So if we condense that and like make most of Singletary's go to Cook, as well as keeping his 30 something that he had, that's solid. That's a very solid option to have. About like I don't know, 70 targets or something.
I was going to call it 65 to 70.
Yeah,
roughly.
So 70 targets. That's good on a talented offense that's going to be scoring a lot of points. And then
that will play in the hurry up.
Yeah, and that will is going to he's going to have some rushing as well. It's not going to be nothing. But the problem is, they keep saying about we're going to take some stuff away from Josh Allen in terms of rushing. We're going to take some stuff off his shoulders so that he doesn't wear down. And we did see that a little bit last year at the end of the year. Might have been because of the elbow injury that we talked about earlier. But once from week 10 on, which is when we had heard about the injury, Devin Singletary had double-digit carries in every game but 2. He played every game. So that's from week 10 on to 18. 8 games, only 2 of them he didn't have double-digit carries, and that's where he scored all of his touchdowns for Singletary.
Right.
So they started using running backs in the red zone instead of doing the just Josh Allen, do your thing type stuff. So are they going to continue that? Or was that just because he had an injury and they wanted to save him for the playoffs? Because they were very well off into the playoffs. Because that'll determine whether Damian Harris is worth anything. If he doesn't get any touchdowns or any work in the red zone, Damian Harris is just useless.
Yeah, Damian Harris is LeGarrette Blount every year except for the year he had all those crazy touchdowns. He's fully useless at that point, especially in PPR.
It's fine to do Cook because in the range that he's going in terms of ADP of running backs, he's about the best upside you could have in terms of players around him. Like, you have him, you got maybe Gibson, who we know is very sporadic in Washington based on Coach Rivera's hate for him or something. I don't know. And then it becomes guys like Rashad Penny in Philly, who is certainly not going to be the lead or not going to be the bell cow back, but he's shown big playability and been extremely electric whenever he's been healthy. And then you're dropping down to guys like Khalil Herbert and stuff. Stutch.
Right.
So we're all in committees here. These are all committee guys. So in that term, you're going to look at the strongest offenses and the teams that are going to use those running backs overall the most. Bills historically with Josh Allen have not used the running back much. So that's why you're taking Cook as the most expensive of that group, and he's on the team that does not really care as much about the running back position unless they change their philosophy, which they could do because they've said it multiple years.
This is the why I couched it the way I couched it. I'm interested in Cook. The question does become, right? I think we agree on that much at least. The question really isn't about the roles or whatever, any of that stuff. It literally comes down to the fact that it's like, do you want to take a Bills running back in the 6th round? Because the cliff at running back this year, it happens fast. It gets really ugly really quickly. Like, there's a few other sleepers in there that you had, like David Montgomery is going way late, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And if we brought up David Montgomery, it's like, well, depending on where he goes, I'd much rather David Montgomery than Cook, because I think Montgomery's role is going to be largely the Jamal Williams role, and it's like, well, if he even gets 3/4 of that would be spectacular, and David Montgomery's a much better player than Jamal Williams at the stage of their respective careers. But speaking purely about Cook, if you're evaluating just the Bills, Cook's the one I want. But I do concede the idea that if you didn't want to spend a 6th round pick on a Bills running back, I would have no real counter argument to that. Like, if you're just going to tell me that I cannot get behind the idea that either one of these guys is worth a 6th round pick, I wouldn't give you any kind of side eye because I know the risks. You know what I mean? The risks are you laid them out very flatly. The risks are that nobody pops and they don't use the running back the way that they were going to. And it all goes cake in the rain and you're stuck with an RB3 that's completely useless. And that's a real dog for your team. So it is worth going through the actual risks to this conversation with the viewer. Mike B, you've been waiting very patiently to jump in here. Go ahead, my friend. The floor is yours. Take the floor.
Yeah, I think I'm out on both these guys, Damian Harris, James Cook, at where they're going. We talked about James Cook in the 6th. I think Damian Harris is it late 9th or 10th round. Kind of out on both of them. Although, if you want to make the argument that you can see James Cook having, they basically need to have he needs to have a J.D. McKissick, Naheem Hines, 80 catch type of season where I think in 2020 both those running backs in PPR formats were like top 15 because they caught 80 passes. So if you can see the path for James Cook for that, then draft him in that 6th, 7th round range. I will say this: it did seem like, if you remember last offseason, they basically had a contract with J.D. McKissick, and then it fell through, and he went back to Washington. And then they drafted James Cook, maybe overdrafted him in the 2nd round. It seemed like they really wanted to find that running back that could be that outlet, dump off pass catcher for Josh Allen. It didn't play out like we thought with James Cook. There's a lot of empty targets gone with Devin Singletary, I think over 50 targets, like we said. So it just, to me, in order to justify that draft spot, he's going to have to, can we see him get to that 80 catch threshold? And I just don't see it. Now, if you tell me if I can get him in the late 7th, 8th round, okay, I'll take a shot. Same with Damian Harris. If I can get him a round or two later, I'll take a shot because I do think they want to lighten the load on Josh Allen a little bit, take away, that running up the middle and, those goal line, those tough in between the tackle runs. And, Damian Harris, if you're going to bank on a running back scoring double-digit touchdowns, bank on a running back that's on a good offensive team, right? So both those guys, I kind of want them a round or two later than ADP, to be honest.
It would be nice if they were a little bit, if a little bit more of that was priced in. But I think that really covers the running back room, guys. That's what else is there to say? I mean, it'd be nice if everything was a little bit cheaper. Really, kind of is. That could actually be the slogan for 2023 in general. It would just be nice if everything was a little bit cheaper. And I don't mean fantasy football. I mean like the year 2023 that'd be great. Let's go to wide receiver here. I think it's time to pivot. Wide receiver for this team is hysterical. I'm gonna list their entire wide receiver room. Ready? Hang on. I gotta. Stefon Diggs, Gabe Davis, Khalil Shakir, Deontay Hardy, Trent Sherfield, Justin Shorter, John Brown, Desmond Petman, and Keyshawn Johnson. Yes, you heard me say John Brown, by the way. Those of you with a long memory will know who I'm talking about. Yes, that is John Smoke Brown is still on this roster. How is that possible? Like, that's insanity to me.
I remember he had that one catch against, I think it was New England, that was like a 40-yard bomb that was nice. So maybe they just like that and then decide to keep him.
I don't know. Like, it blows me away that he's still in the NFL. The only name that really matters here, there's two that'll be drafted. I list this all off for a defined reason, not just to waste your time. There is a reason I listed this off. If you were counting, that means they're holding 9 wide receivers. What that tells me loud and clear is that they don't know what they want the back end of their wide receiver room to look like. They just don't know. And they're just throwing bodies at it. And I feel like they've been stuck in that since they lost Cole Beasley out of the slot. All those, lost / moved on from / Father Time moved on from. There's a lot of reasons for that. But they've never really been able to find like a proper slot. They've tried it last year with Jamison Crowder. Didn't work out. Who was the other guy?
Isaiah McKenzie.
Yes, thank you. Isaiah McKenzie.
Yeah, who actually won the job, like I had said last year.
I'm editing that out. I'm editing all that out. Don't go back last year and watch Steve and I talk about drafting Jamison Crowder. Don't dig that up. I'm editing all this. In fact, I'm cutting your mic. You were 100% correct about that. I took that mea culpa.
It didn't
later
work out
on.
well overall.
No, it did not. Like you were right, but ultimately no one was right.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a hollow victory in that regard. But yeah, Isaiah McKenzie no longer with the team. I still see the same problem, guys. The names I listed off. Who's a slot? The one that would be the most close to a slot is Trent Sherfield, former Dolphin. He played slot.
Well, yeah, but actually, Deontay Hardy and Khalil Shakir are the two leaders for the slot in terms of wide receiver.
Right.
Guaranteed that those two are the premier slot options. Khalil Shakir was a phenomenal prospect, but a fifth-round pick by the Bills last year.
Right. Yep.
Showed some flashes, even in the playoff game. He was a bit highlighted against the Dolphins, at least.
Yeah. He was okay.
Yeah. So he's a phenomenal slot, very shifty guy. Deontay Hardy is one of those you can either get the ball in his hands and because he's a punt return style player, let him make some players miss, or he also is good down the field as a deep threat. They made a point. He was the first player they signed in free agency. Was Deontay Hardy.
That is true. They did do that.
It was to a decent contract. It wasn't bad.
It wasn't one of those 1 year tomato can like here's $500,000 come play football for me contracts. No, it was a decent deal.
And he was coming off of an injury last year, so they didn't care because they saw what he did the year before that and liked what they saw apparently. So in my opinion, Hardy is the leader as of July 19th to be the slot weapon. Other than we'll talk about the tight ends later about how they're going to work out, but as of right now, it's going to be, in my opinion,
about the tight ends. I'm sitting that out under protest.
Diggs and Gabriel Davis out wide, and then Deontay Hardy, in my opinion, in the slot. Which, as we've seen with Cole Beasley, 100-plus slot targets is not crazy for this offense.
You're now getting to the reason why I'm going through this entire exercise, which is we have seen historically the slot position in Buffalo has value. It's a thing. It's a thing that you can set your watch by. They need a slot, and they know what's funny is they know they need a slot because they noticed it themselves when they lost that slot position. Their offense is as effective. You can see it on the tape. Like it's when they had a working slot weapon, they were much more polished and put together because you have that underneath stuff more available to you when you need it. When they lost that, they kind of became a little bit more one-dimensional and teams started to key in on some of their better players. They also stalled out on drives a little bit more. They need a slot weapon. That's the reason I went through this whole exercise. I don't think they know who it's going to be. They're holding a lot of wide receivers. Definitely not all those guys are making this team. So that's why I was trying to bring it up because none of those guys have an ADP, folks. None of them. And none of them are worth a draft pick. None of them. But this is something that you should be paying attention to. Savvy players will pay attention to this when we get to the waiver wire, the first couple weeks of the season. Somebody's going to step up and emerge at some point here. And I'm going to be paying attention because that's going to be a really fun waiver claim situation. Maybe it is Deontay Hardy. Maybe you're right. But here's the thing. I'd love to know that in advance and be paying attention and looking for it so I can get Deontay Hardy for a value at some point early in the season before I got to pay through the nose for it later on. It's just something to keep in mind is that for me, at some point, there's going to be a slot in Buffalo and it's going to be a waiver claim battle. It's worth knowing because we all agree on this. None of that is worth any kind of draft pick, right? None of what except for none of those slot guys that we just rattled off and been talking about, none of that is worth a draft pick, right? Like there's nobody you would draft. Is there?
In terms of wide receiver, I don't think either one's going to be draftable in a 12-team league because most people assume that Dalton Kincaid is going to take over that slot, the first-round tight end. He's being drafted.
All right. Put a pin in that.
Yeah.
Circle back to it. Mike Burland. Thoughts on Buffalo slot real quick that don't involve Dalton Kincaid at the moment?
Well, I can't say much because that's who I think is going to be the main guy.
We're gonna put a pin in this conversation. We're going to come back to it in about 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Let's do the two wide receivers that actually, true wide receivers that will get drafted, and then we'll close with tight end. Stefon Diggs.
Yeah.
Still there. still good. Still Josh Allen's favorite target. Weird little thing in the offseason. Anybody care about that? Anybody care?
Nope.
Yeah, me either. Okay. ESPN's trying to make that a news story. I could care less. Like, makes no difference to me. The ESPN's desperate for content and money. I'd say it to your face, the mouse. Like, you just fired all your staff. Like, I didn't do that. You did that. Stefon Diggs, wide receiver 5, translates to 17 overall, roughly, should be. Current ADP, 11 overall. People like Stefon Diggs. There really isn't too much to say about this. If you want to take him 6 spots ahead of his ranking, I don't care. If that's what floats your boat, like, do it. Anybody care? Like,
I don't blame you taking Stefon Diggs in the back end of the first round even.
No.
He's going on 168, 154, 149 targets the past 3 years.
It's pretty good.
Last year, his production dipped in the second half just because of Josh Allen's injury too. I mean, like I said, it affected the whole offense, and Diggs got affected by it. He had 100 yards in every game except for one in the first 8 weeks. And
yeah, he was on fire.
Only did 2 more times the rest of the season. That's because week 9, week 10, when that elbow injury happened. So no, I'm not scared of Diggs in any way whatsoever. Surefire top 5 wide receiver.
Yeah, Mike B. Diggs.
300%.
All right.
There's not much else to say.
That's what I'm saying. We don't need to spend a whole lot of time on it. It's pretty cut and dry.
Yeah.
If you want him, take him. I'm not going to give you any side eye about it. I don't think anybody else's either. Here's some side eye. Gabe Davis, wide receiver 39, translates to 90 overall. Currently going at 97 overall. I'm going to pass. I'm going to go ahead and pass on that. He was the hype train poster child last year. He was the face of it. And it just didn't pan out. He has big games.
It panned out in 3 weeks. In like 2 or 3 weeks it did.
I agree with that. He has big games. That's what I was just getting into. He has big games, but it's not consistent. And I don't see any way that it could be consistent with Diggs commanding the volume that he commands, with them. They have to figure out some kind of slot to make their offense work. I personally believe they're going to try and throw some more dump offs to James Cook. We already debated that. Whether you believe that or not, it doesn't matter, because it doesn't actually translate. It doesn't mean anything as it relates to Gabe Davis, because I don't see any chance that his piece of the pie is going to get bigger, which is what a lot of people were hanging their hat on last year, and I just can't deal with the volatility of it. To your point, Mike, he had 3 huge games. So when you look at his stats overall, it looks okay. But when you take those 3 games out, he was atrocious. He was certainly not startable, borderline not rosterable. And given his ADP from last year, I would think people would have learned their lesson about this, but apparently not, because he's still being drafted in that is what would be the 9th round, effectively.
Yeah.
I'm good. Anybody want to take a punt at this past me? Yay or nay? I'll take either. Yes or no.
I'll say if he seems to me, at the current ADP, I'm kind of out. He seems very build of your team dependent. Like if he is your last flex on a kind of a deep starting roster where you can survive the 2 catches for 40 yards that he's going to give you, and then he hits every couple of weeks, because he was hitting every couple of weeks until that elbow injury, then maybe you can have him on your roster. Definitely in a best ball league, which is not our focus, but if best ball, you want to have him on your roster because he's going to hit every 3rd week, right? And you don't have to worry about him not hitting. So he's very kind of how you build your team dependent, in my opinion. So, but I think I'm out on that current ADP.
Yeah, I mean, looking at players that are around him in ADP, like Jahan Dotson, Juju Smith-Schuster, Brandon Cooks, even like Michael Thomas, I'd feel much better about having any of those players because I know at least that I'll have a much more reasonable expectation each week.
Right.
So I hate the players that are like Deshaun Jackson-esque, that are, hey, you're going to get those 30-point weeks, but you're also going to get a 2-point week.
Right.
I hate dealing with those type players, so I generally tend to stay away from them.
I have a similar philosophy. It's why I don't roster Tyler Lockett. Like there's reasons to roster players like that, but I can't handle the volatility. You mentioned Juju Smith-Schuster. We'll cover that when we get to the Patriots. Now that DeAndre Hopkins is signed with the Titans, okay, Juju's back to being the wide receiver 1. He's going to be the wide receiver 1, even though he's probably going to play in the slot. I'd be much more interested in Juju Smith-Schuster giving me a reliable floor that I can expect and deal with on a weekly basis, rather than deal with the idea that I gotta pray Gabe Davis catches some sort of 60-yard touchdown to pay off my week. I can't deal with that from a roster team building construction. I think largely we're saying the same. We're saying the similar stuff. Mike, you seem to be Burland. You seem to be a little bit more burlish. We'll go with that. The unintentional pun. But even you were saying at a 9th round pick, it's too high. Like I can't. I would have thought people would have learned from last year. This is one of the most disappointing things that I saw, where it was like when I was putting this together, where it's like, did we learn nothing? We've learned nothing about this. Like, and I agree. Like, my problem is, like, you talk about, he's going to have a big week, and you said every third week. If it was actually every third week and I could predict that and I knew that, I'd be fine with it. But that's the problem, is that I don't know when he's going to get the 30. So how do I trust him in my lineup? I can't. So it makes it very hard for me to want to even deal with the whole thing. I tend to just let players like that go to other people and let them deal with the headache of that all year. I will concede to you, though, if he did fall into like the 11th, 12th round, and he was one of my last flexes, and I wasn't counting on him at any given point, and I just needed him for buys or something, and maybe I get lucky. Yeah, okay. If his ADP was there, I wouldn't be having this conversation. All right, we talked about Gabe Davis. Let's not spend any more time on Gabe Davis. Don't draft Gabe Davis in the 9th round. If he falls to the 12th round or something like that, go nuts. Let's do tight end / slot. Let's finish the conversation we were just having. And there's 2 tight ends on this team. Good old Dawson Knox. Folks who've been playing fantasy football for a while will know who that is. He's been with the team for a long time. I personally don't think he's very good. He's had some flashes. I think he falls very neatly in the group of tight end doesn't matter. And you can just get him for free at the end of your draft, functionally, if you want. He is the early ranking tight end 18, which would translate to 143 overall. However, his ADP is 166. I'll tell you why. Dalton Kincaid, rookie tight end. Tight end 26 by ranking. 165 overall is what that would translate to. ADP 135. The public is telling you what the public believes. I will start this. I understand the general argument that Dalton Kincaid could very easily take over that slot role, and that in theory they have drafted him, in fact, to do so. My counter argument to that is that, with the exception of Kyle Pitts in our lifetime, what rookie tight end does anything? Ever. Take Kyle Pitts out of it. Throw it away. Rookie tight end historically does not matter. It's the hardest. It is one of, if not the hardest positions to learn coming out of college. You have to learn the route tree. You have to learn how to be a pro. You have to learn how to block. You have to learn how to do it all. I fully acknowledge that in subsequent years, in 2024, maybe even by the end of 2023, we start to see that Kincaid effectively is the slot, and they change their personnel grouping so that. What do you think, Mike? What does that translate to? So are they going to play? I believe that would be called 12 personnel, where they have 2 tight ends on the field. If I'm doing that correctly, you would have
it would be, which they
Knox
ran
and Kincaid,
the lowest in the NFL the past year or two.
But right. So, but is that because they only had 1 tight end that was good? Are they changing schemes? I don't know.
There's a lot of question marks when it came to that draft pick. There became a lot of question marks because Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox are both basically the same.
Yeah, same guy, largely.
They're both so they're 6'3" or 6'4".
One's younger than the other.
246 to 255, something around there's that range, and they both spent only like 30% of their snaps in line last year. One was in the NFL, one was in college. So the big thing is, there's one of two ways this is going to go. Either Dawson Knox is going to play more in line, and Dalton Kincaid is going to be the slot weapon, which is what obviously his ADP is dictating, or they're actually going to use Dalton Kincaid as a general tight end like they've used Dawson Knox in the past few years, but Dawson Knox's contract is an out after this coming year.
Right.
Which he's a top 10 paid, I think top 8 paid tight end in a year in an average per year basis. And he's like 13 mil. They can cut him after this coming season for like a 7 mil cap hit or something. And then they were like, we want to get rid of Dawson Knox and we want something better. We think Dalton Kincaid's better. That's how we're going to have our future at tight end.
Yeah,
Mike Burland, you had already started going into this a second ago about how you thought Kincaid was going to take over the slot role. Take it away. So give me break it down for me.
I think he has a good chance, and you get the cheat code of, he's listed as a tight end, but he's essentially a receiver like Kyle Pitts or Mike Gesicki. I'm out on Dawson Knox. I think it's hilarious. Like, people were in on him kind of going into last year. He put up essentially the same exact stats, except he had like 3 less touchdowns, and that was my argument. It was like, he's a touchdown dependent tight end, and he doesn't mean anything. And you see what that translates to. I'm interested in Kincaid, and like, again, taking those dart throws of what I like to do. If I don't get Kelsey or Andrews at a value, like, take a couple dart throws at the guys. Maybe take a guy that you're a little more comfortable with, a Gerald Everett or something. You know what he's going to get, and then take a chance on a Dalton Kincaid on a good offense. Where is there a world where Dalton Kincaid is the second leading target getter on this team? Like, there is a world where that's possible. We just talked about, Gabe Davis is the number 2 receiver. He's not a high volume. He's not a target hog. He's probably going to get his 85, 90 targets. Where's the rest of the targets going to go? Stefon Diggs and who else? So there is a world where Kincaid is that number 2 target getter, and that's intriguing. And so I'll take a shot on him if I can get him, in that 12th round, 13th round, where I'm already kind of just taking a shot on 2 tight ends. So he could be the slot receiver. I know you mentioned tight ends. Historically, rookie tight ends don't do well, and that's true. A lot of that I do think is they have to learn how to be blockers and block in the run game. And
that's what I was saying. You got to learn both sides. You got to learn to block. You got to learn your route tree. You got to learn how to be a professional. You're coming out of college. It's a lot to learn.
Yeah,
it's too big for most people to intake.
Yeah, but if they say, okay, Dawson Knox, you're that guy. Dalton Kincaid, you're our, de facto big, super hyped up Cole Beasley. Maybe he doesn't have to. He has an easier learning curve to get into the offense and get onto the field. So he's a guy I'm intrigued about, just because, I kind of expected him to be overdrafted, and he's not really at that point at the ADP in July 19th, where he's not being drafted in the single digits. He is a late round guy still, so I'm fine.
I mean, I would still argue he's being overdrafted. At
Probably
130, that's still a little earlier than what I'd like for a rookie tight end, but that's me with my khaki pants and my. Okay, so I think the 3 of us see this. Actually, it's interesting. I think for the first time we've actually split this 3 ways, because I would tell you, I think Kincaid, good player for the future, name to know. But I think it's Mike's second scenario he laid out is what that is. He's Dawson Knox of the future is what that turns into. Dawson Knox is playing elsewhere next year. Basically, Kincaid gets a learning year to mentor under Knox, to kind of learn how to do stuff, because this is a good team that does not really need to throw their rookie, first round rookie into the fire and say, go get it, son. They got a good enough team. They don't need to do that. So why do it? I think this is going to be almost somewhat of he'll play, but it's going to be somewhat of a redshirt learning year for Kincaid to take over the Knox job. And I think it's going to be one of Hardy, Sherfield, or I'm blanking on the other gentleman. Shakir, who ultimately wins that slot. And Dawson Knox has the same Dawson Knox job for one more year. That's what I think happens. That's where I think we wind up here.
I will say just one thing. I do think this team desperately needs another weapon to step up alongside Diggs. And maybe they thought it was just like us. We thought it was Gabe Davis. Maybe they thought it was Gabe Davis. Didn't work out that way. I just feel like this team really, it's like Diggs and who else. And when you get to the playoffs, I think we saw it with like the Packers and Devontae Adams. It's easy to shut that down. Good teams can shut down when you have the one guy. And I feel like the Bills kind of acknowledge that. That's just why they kind of traded up for Dalton Kincaid. So I do think they desperately need this second option. And maybe they think that is Kincaid year one.
Maybe. Mike Manning, break the tie for me. What do you think? You gave us the scenarios. What do you think is most likely to happen?
I think it's closer to using more 2 tight end sets.
So they actually would go to more 12 personnel in that scenario and actually do a scheme change, is what you're kind of thinking.
That's what I'm thinking.
Okay.
Because I feel like that they aren't sure about, they just want playmakers on the field, and they're probably going to gauge it based on how the offense is running. Both, whether it would be that Hardy or Shakir is doing well in the slot, or even Kincaid, or if actually having them both in line is creating matchup problems because of how athletic those two are. Because Dawson Knox is not a slouch in athleticism.
No, he's not. He's not terrible at being an athlete.
So if you sit there and have just the threat of Stefon Diggs doing everything he does, Gabe Davis being the deep threat he is, and you're just opening the middle of the field with 2 tight ends that are arguably the speed or athleticism of some wide receivers, maybe it works. Maybe they just don't use the slot as much. It could be like that.
Riddle me this, Batman. Typically, teams that go to 12 personnel, this could be specious reasoning, so you'll have to check me. Typically, usually teams in my mind, when they go to 12 personnel, they typically run the ball more. Is that part of this whole equation as well? Then maybe that's part of what we're going to attempt to do. Maybe it's, hey, we know we have Diggs, we know what we have. Gabe Davis can run down the field with his hand up. Maybe that's a philosophy change. Is that baked into what you're trying to say here? That maybe they'll run the ball a little bit more?
I'd expect them to have more of a running threat, like more of a run play rate than they have.
I don't mean Josh Allen scrambles for his life. I mean like actually trying to run the ball and establish the run.
Runs by running backs as well.
Design runs by running backs, whichever of them it may be.
Because if you look at even Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith being signed to the Patriots in the same offseason, I mean, they invested a lot in tight end, and we all thought this has to mean that they're going to go to the 12 personnel where both of these players are going to be used, and one in the line and one in the slot like they have with Gronk and Hernandez, and just didn't happen.
Yeah, it didn't work out.
So is it going to be like everybody thinks the one thing's going to happen and nope, just throwing a curveball to you? This is the NFL. These guys are not going to let us know what they want to do or what they're planning on doing until they do it.
It's a good point.
I'm just saying the options are one of the 3 players in the slot between Kincaid, Shakir, and Hardy, or they're planning for the future at tight end and they're going to maybe use a little bit more 12 personnel.
It's good stuff. It's good stuff. I wish we had a real answer for the people out there that we could actually like really point to, but this is one of those things in life where we just don't have enough data points.
There's so many variables.
There's too much going on in the background. And to your point, they're not going to tell you. They're not going to tell you. You got to kind of divine it out of the universe. So basically what I think we can sum up here is this. Allen is good. We know he's good, but if you want him, you got to pay. For me, the price tag is too high. For other people, I can't speak to that. Diggs is Diggs. If you want him, you got to pay. Go get him. Gabe Davis is being overvalued. I would not spend a 9th round pick on that. I'd let that fall or let somebody else deal with the headache. And then to be honest, if you want to take a shot on Dalton Kincaid in like the 13th round, I don't care. 13th, 14th round, go nuts, man. I've seen crazier stuff than that. At least the investment point is right. for something like that. It's not for me personally. And then none of those wide receivers that we mentioned are draftable. They're if they pop, they pop. Just know who they are because they're on the waiver wire. Really, your only decision points, true decision points, I think, is the running back. And as we mentioned, I don't think it really depends on like which running back. I think it just depends on, do you want to spend a 6th-round running back, a 6th-round pick on any Bills running back? And the answer to that, I might be willing to do it for Cook. I wouldn't do it for Harris for me personally. Maybe I would do it for Cook, depending on how the draft was going. You know what I mean? If running back is getting vacuumed up and I feel like I'm going to get left out in the cold and I'm going to need to do something here, I don't like reaching, but you got to have at least 3 running backs. You know, it's like maybe we go that way. But it's all debatable. Hell, if you're right, Mike, and they end up going to more 12 personnel, that almost makes the case for Damian Harris.
Agreed.
Like it's just the way it goes. Like, but I think the general consensus would be we would prefer it if the running backs were a little bit cheaper in ADP. So you're kind of hoping they fall. Now, even I wouldn't challenge that. So Bills are a good team, man. It's hard to find the diamonds in the rough on the good team sometimes. But at least I think we've painted the best picture possible. Mike Manning, final thoughts on Buffalo on our way out the door here as we wrap up here for July 19th.
Similar to Baltimore, like we said, this is an offense you're going to want to have a piece of. It just depends if you're going to want to pay for Allen or Diggs, or if you're going to want to take one of those risks, because they're going to have more fantasy viable players. It's just going to be figuring out if you drafted the right one of those players, or if you were able to catch one of those wide receivers on the waiver wire. You know, so it's going to be tough, but it's going to come to risk. And in terms of ADP, I'm not taking the risk in the running back room. But I am willing to see about Dalton Kincaid because a 1st-round pick is a 1st-round pick. You invested a lot in that. I think that, if anything, Kincaid or one of the wide receivers are going to become something.
All right. Mike Burland, take us home, my friend.
Yep. I'm Allen and Diggs. I'm fine if you want to draft them. And basically everyone else on this team, if I can get them a round or 2 later, that's kind of where I want them. I think they're all slightly overvalued, but you also have to take your shot on who you believe in. So, it's Allen and Diggs, and then everyone else. I want a round later, but if I have to take them, I'm okay with it.
You mentioned that, and it's actually something to keep in mind when we talk about good teams for the future. For anybody still listening to this, good teams, typically the projections get inflated. You do have that problem. The Chiefs is a prime example. We've talked about it for 3 years, year after year after year. The Chiefs all get inflated. So it does screw with the ADPs in that regard. And I do believe some of that is happening in Buffalo because it's a good team. And people know it's a good team. So the projections get messed with. And even more than the projections, the ADPs, even if the projections are good, the ADPs still get messed with either way. So it is something to keep in mind when you're evaluating good teams. Either way, we've covered Buffalo. I hope that has been of value. In the listening audience's world, tomorrow we will be sitting down to talk about something that I think is interesting that I don't know if you gentlemen will find as interesting as me. But it's the new look Carolina Panthers. New QB, no more CMC. It's going to be weird. But until then, folks, keep up the nonsense. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
I'm Tim Kitzrow from NBA Jam and NFL Blitz, and you can find all the guys at ImportantNonsense.com. Kaboom!